This is Health Call Online, the place for extended versions of interviews you hear in our weekly radio broadcast, the Health Call Radio Hour, heard on more stations around the country as they join the Health Call Radio Network. Well, how are you feeling it? You know, America seems to be in an epidemic of stress these days. Concerns over the economy, world affairs, crime, what's happening in your family. We all live with stress, and you may not be immediately aware of it, but your body could be. There is something called adrenal exhaustion that's been talked about, and it's all about how your body is responding to the hormones that is driven by the stress response. We're going to learn more about that today, talking with pharmacist and clinical nutritionist Greg Russell. He is the founder of Fort Wayne Custom RX. You'll find them in Fort Wayne at 425 East DuPont Road, right behind the Casa Grill. Also find them online at fwcustomrx.com. Greg, good to talk with you again about this.
Great to be here. Are you stressed? It's tax time.
I was just going to ask you that. How's your stress
level?
Oh,
it went through the roof. It's tax time.
Yeah, there's that as well. So let's talk about this whole idea of adrenal exhaustion. You say that's something kind of a misnomer that's been popularized.
Yeah, it's kind of this thing that came out around the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of books written on it. And, you know, the concept of adrenal exhaustion is there's a medical condition called Addison's disease where your adrenal glands don't produce the hormones that need cortisol and things like epinephrine or adrenaline, as we like to call it. And that's a medical condition. And then there's this other medical condition that people get called Cushing's syndrome, which is an extreme amount of cortisol. And a lot of times that's kind of drug-induced by giving drugs like prednisone. So those are kind of the two things on the end. And then we have these degrees in between that have been called adrenal fatigue, it's quote unquote. And really, it's not that your adrenal glands poop out. So these adrenal glands, they sit on top of your kidneys, and they contain a variety of hormones. And these hormones do different things depending on which hormone we're talking about. But basically, it's all in part of the endocrine system. And the brain, the master brain, will connect through a series of different glands, the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus gland, and then the hypothalamus, then the pituitary, and then finally the adrenal. So we call it the HPA axis. And as the brain sends signals down through the system, down to the adrenal glands respond. And what happens, I tell people, it's kind of like I live out in the country and I have a bad cell phone connection. It's a two-way connection. So the brain senses how much hormone is being released during times of need, and the adrenal glands respond, and when there's too much hormone, the brain shuts it off. So that is the normal response, and we call that a negative feedback. So the brain is really in charge here, but what happens is under chronic stress, and we'll talk about what chronic stress is in a second, then the brain kind of says, hey, we have to protect the brain at all cost. And some of these hormones can be dangerous if they're constantly high, too high.
Well, how would I know if I've got this condition going on? How am I going to feel? What are some of the symptoms?
Yeah. Well, a lot of this, increased anxiety, and probably over a period of time, poor sleep function, then of course leads to more fatigue, hence the word adrenal fatigue came out. But a lot of people they get fuzzy brain, they just don't feel like they're on top of their game. And it's kind of insidious because this is kind of part of that flight or fight system that we talk about. If I see a train coming, I've got to move out of the way quickly. So the adrenal glands contain a small amount of epinephrine that your body will produce as soon as it's needed. But over a period of time, if you're constantly under stress, your cortisol levels go higher, and cortisol has a job, and that is to heal. And unfortunately, it's supposed to go up and it's supposed to go down, and it's regulated by sunlight. And I'll explain that in a second. So a lot of people will feel really tired and or anxious.
Yeah. So yeah, that list of symptoms associated with this can be fairly long. If I want
Very
to
long.
take a look at what my cortisol levels are, I mean, that can be measured using saliva, right? But
Yeah,
that's kind of a difficult sort of to get that
concept,
right
isn't it?
and find that balance, right?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of different type of thinking here. So there's three ways to measure cortisol. You can do a total urine cortisol test where you measure your cortisol for 24 hours. However, that doesn't tell you how your body is actually responding to the levels. And like I said, the sunlight has a role. So obviously, when we wake up in the morning, the sun comes out, our cortisol levels they go up naturally, and they should, because cortisol is telling your body to get ready to get up and go to work. Okay, and as the day goes on, those cortisol levels start to decline, and they start to decline fairly rapidly. By noon, they may be roughly about 50% of what they were in the morning, and by the evening, they're 50% again, and by bedtime, 50% again. So kind of, you think of it that way, and so because it's preparing your body, to go to sleep. Right? So you're not going to be up, supposedly. Right. That's the goal. So we want to look at that pattern and make sure that you're on that healthy pattern. So a total urine cortisol is not going to give you much information. It's just going to tell you how much total cortisol you have. A blood test can be done, but you've got to go and get at least 4 points for it to tell us that pattern again. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go to the hospital 4 times, especially at 6 or 7 in the morning.
Not going to go have 4 blood draws in one day.
Yeah, that probably stressed me out putting the needle in. Probably caused my cortisol levels to go up right there. And so finally, an in-home test is one of the easiest ways to do that. And it's easy to do. You just collect your saliva in a test tube, and there's appointed times that you do that.
I see. But it's nice to know, it's nice to have those data points, but there's no harm in realizing that my symptoms are telling me I have something going on, and to start addressing those symptoms.
Absolutely.
One way you can do that is through lifestyle modification. So get more sleep, exercise, improve your diet, all those things that we've talked about before, and those are important. But if I want to go a step beyond that, what are some things that I can do to kind of support my system?
Well, of course, Mother Nature will provide those things. And again, they're herbals, usually in plants. And, well, I should say always in plants. And, Mother Nature has a way of protecting plants. And so some of the plants that are out there, they're called adaptogen plants or adaptogenic herbs. And their goal is to help modulate. In other words, if your cortisol levels are too high, they're going to lower them. If your cortisols are too low, they're going to help rebalance so that your brain will restore your cortisol levels to where they should be. So they're important, and they do different effects. So it's kind of neat because you can kind of mix and match some of those herbs to whatever the symptoms are. So I always ask people, do you feel like you're wired and tired? That's one. If you're wired and tired, you probably need an herbal that's going to actually kind of bring your cortisol levels down. Okay, so there are different stages, and if your cortisol levels are too high, we got to get them down in certain times. So we got a time when to give those herbs, and we got to know exactly what your symptoms are.
Okay. So these adaptogens are the products that are going to help my body sort of adapt and accommodate this issue. We've mentioned some of these in previous appearances on the program, but let's walk through them again because I think they're so helpful for people. And one of them that I know you feel strongly about is ashwagandha. Now, lots of people are talking about this herb these days. Tell me more about how it applies to...
It's interesting. Apparently, the weightlifting community is starting to use this, and it's because it helps performance. It's an anti-stress herb. It's an Indian herb. It stands, the name, from my understanding, stands for horse, and the thought is the horse is a strong endurance animal. So that's where it comes from. It improves the ability to rebound on stress. So some of these herbs work on things called heat shock proteins. And what that is they've measured these cells as you heat them up in animals, and they look at how resilient they are. And I don't know exactly how they do it, but what they do, they've identified these genes, these heat shock protein genes, and they know that these herbs have an effect on them. They make them more tolerant to the stress, and heat being a stressor. So ashwagandha improves the stress resilience on these. It seems to help improve the immune response, and of course we talked about how it already helps improve physical endurance.
And this is a capsule product I take a couple times a day, something like that?
Right. And you know what's easy about it too is it kind of makes my job easy because it works either if you're high or low. So it tends to be one of the very first ones because I don't have to be that accurate on it. You know, we can try it and hopefully, you know, it helps. But again, I do like things in combinations.
Right. And you've L-theanine is another one of these products that seems to have a big impact.
Yeah, L-theanine, again, is the one of my very favorite products, and I use this all the time for people who are stressed. So if you're stressed and you're not sleeping, we'll regularly dose L-theanine. Of course, it's an active amino acid that's found in green tea. It counters the effects of caffeine. It helps reduce, or it increases serotonin, which of course is going to increase melatonin, so it's going to help with sleep. It increases dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good reward hormone, and it increases these alpha brainwave patterns, which I've heard some of your talks on sleep. Alpha brainwaves are really important because they're kind of the calming, meditative form of sleep. So it doesn't cause drowsiness, but it causes relaxation. And people will report in some of the sleep formulas that they get better sleep with the L-theanine in them.
Let's move ahead to one of them that, since we're talking about sleep and calming, and that is passion flower. I love the idea of using a botanical here to change my stress response. What is passion flower's role?
Yeah, well, passion flower again does seem to have some effect on melatonin, and it's been used historically for years, and it's used in a lot of herbals to help sleep. You know, as we get into herbals, it's really important that you understand that quality of the herbal is really important, and they have to contain a certain percentage of different constituents, and what part of that herb was used. You know, is it the stem, the leaf, the flower, you know, or the root? And so sometimes some of the less than reputable manufacturers don't put very good quality herbs in, or don't put enough quantity of that herb in it.
Yeah, you know, in the next half hour, we're going to be talking to a Tony Shields from Fresh Cap Mushrooms about using cordyceps, which I know is something that you also strongly believe in. And he echoes exactly that. You know, when you're buying supplements, you need to be very cautious about where these things are coming from because, he agrees with you.
Yeah, cordyceps is a fungus that comes off mushrooms or something, and it's fabulous for your blood, fabulous for endurance, good for the kidneys.
So you can meet with somebody like Greg and kind of talk through symptoms and find the right mixture for you, but you've also taken some of this work out of that process, right? And you have a couple of compounds that you like to recommend for people. Tell me about these.
Well, so a lot of the compounds that we will use we're trying to get to the underlying cause. So for example, if somebody is stressed out because they're constantly in pain, we may make a topical pain compound that doesn't have, narcotics or anything like that. So, it may have an anti-inflammatory in it. And of course, I do have to say our compounds are by prescription only. So we have to work with your doctor on it. So that's one of the things we do. If it's an autoimmune condition, we may use something like low-dose naltrexone, which has anti-inflammatory, autoimmune. Those are probably two of the more popular compounds that we use for stress, per se.
So in an over-the-counter approach, you have some products that combine multiple elements, and one of them is called Endocrine Health. And tell me about what this Adrenal Rejuvenate Endocrine Health does for me.
Yeah, Adrenal Rejuvenate is kind of what we use early on when somebody is starting to have. So just a little back physiology here. If the cortisol level is high in the morning and it's staying high throughout the day, that's somebody who's early on in the stress response system, their body is trying to recover from the stress. So to help the healing, we want to bring that cortisol down. So that contains ingredients primarily to do that. It's going to contain bacopa. Bacopa is an ingredient that helps with acetylcholine production. Acetylcholine helps kick in the parasympathetic nervous system, in other words, the relaxation system. It has phosphatidylserine in it. Phosphatidylserine helps lower the cortisol by it helps lower cortisol, and we're not quite sure how it does it, but it's been helpful for that. And it also has my friend ashwagandha in it and rhodiola, and we already talked about L-theanine. So it's a combination herbal, and the goal for it is to help lower that cortisol down. So we may not want to give it to you in the morning because your cortisol is good, but we might want to give that for you like in the afternoon and the evenings.
So if I start taking this product, how soon will I notice some effect, and how am I going to notice that it's working?
Yeah, people report usually within that first month that they're starting to feel somewhat better. It may take 3 to 6 months to see optimal therapy. Okay, and a lot of that's going to depend. So, if you're getting the sleep, you're doing some of the lifestyle things that you need to do. In addition, those are going to they're going to help improve you. They're going to help move you along a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm. And are there any medications that this is not going to play nice with? If there anything that's contraindicated?
Well, the biggest problem with these products would be if somebody was taking prednisone, for example. Because that's going to counteract. Generally, patients that are on blood thinners, I'm always very, very concerned when they take some of these herbal products. That's the primary one. Rhodiola, which is in this product, can have some drug interactions. So we kind of look them up but they're usually the rarer drugs that aren't used very often. So I might be more concerned if somebody comes in and says, I'm on cancer chemotherapy. I'm not going to want to give them something that could interfere with that. And of course, I would never give a pregnant woman these type of products either.
Sure, right. Because even though these are botanicals and natural substances, they're still powerful, right?
They're
you
very
have to be
powerful,
cautious
so
about
we want to
that.
be careful. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the Adrenal Rejuvenate, and that kind of gets me back to a natural place. And then there's Adrenal Support. Tell me more about this one.
Yeah. So as people go on and their stress becomes more pronounced, over a period of time, the brain says, you know what, I'm going to quit listening. I can't make more cortisol. Because cortisol is inflammatory to the brain over a period of time. So it'll make another hormone that kind of counterbalances called DHEA, which, as we've talked about before, is a sex hormone. But DHEA can only do so much. And over a period of time, the DH levels will rise, and then they'll start to fall. And then eventually, the cortisol levels start to fall. And so when somebody has a flatline cortisol, and that would be somebody who, now this is not the wired and tired person. This is a person that's tired all the time. Okay,
yeah,
they don't feel wired.
They're
just exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
So this product will contain a couple different types of things in it. One is it will have some adrenal glandular in it. And again, this is not really an herb. It's an animal product. And as I must put the disclaimer that herbal products are not FDA regulated. Okay, so we have to take that into account. But the whole idea is you give some adrenal replacement, and you're going to kind of help heal the adrenal glands themselves. Okay. We don't really know how adrenal glandulars work. We really don't. But we do know they do seem to help some people. So that's one of the ingredients in it. Then you're going to have things like, additionally, you're going to have the ashwagandha in it. You're going to have another one of my favorite herbs called holy basil. Now, holy basil is a Ayurvedic, or a Chinese herb, excuse me. It's a Chinese herb. And it's one of the most popular herbs in Chinese medicine because it does a whole lot of different things. It helps regulate blood pressure, cholesterol, and they just use it like crazy. That's definitely one you want to avoid in pregnancy because that has some different issues. And it really is an anti-fatigue herb. So I like this one because it helps with fatigue. Also, we'll have Schisandra, which is another adaptogenic herb in it, which is stimulatory. It also helps your immune system. So, people that are chronically fatigued tend to get more colds and more flus and sick, right? So we're trying to boost the immune system. And then finally, it's got licorice. Now, we're not talking about licorice the candy, we're talking about licorice the herb. And there are two types of licorice herbs that are used in medicine. This is the pure licorice herb, and this blocks the breakdown of cortisol in the body. So it allows your cortisol levels to go up. Now, I have to be careful with people that have high blood pressure, that aren't controlled, because this also will increase aldosterone. Aldosterone causes water retention, can increase somebody's blood pressure. So those are the things we kind of have to keep in mind as we're using that specific product. And again, we may give this herb earlier in the morning, and we might even give that other formulation in the night. Just kind of depends on what your symptoms are and what's going on with your pattern.
So, and that really kind of gets to the point of why it's so important to have a conversation with someone like you who knows exactly what's going on, understands these products and how they're used, trained in the clinical applications of these botanicals, nutritional supplements. So if I'm thinking that I want to talk to my doctor about some type of prescription anti-anxiety medication or an antidepressant, are these powerful enough that I might want to start here before going there?
I think it's going to be a big depend. In the case of it's really affecting your lifestyle and your health, I'm never going to tell you to do this instead of going to your doctor.
Sure.
We want,
right.
If you need medical help, you need medical help. If your anxiety is through, and I've had people come in and I've been blunt with them. I said, you got a 9 out of 10 on a 10 scale of anxiety. I don't think an herbal medicine is going to help you. Okay, it may support and it may be additional benefit, but you need some additional help, whether it's counseling or pharmaceutical. There's a place for pharmaceutical drugs. However, for somebody that's going through a little bit of stress, tax season's going to come, it's going to go, so, might need a little bit of help right now, or, somebody getting ready for a wedding or, a life event, then these can be very helpful. L-theanine works very quickly, which has always amazed me. It doesn't take a lot of it, and it seems to work within a few days for people. So I love L-theanine, as I've said before.
And is there any reason to avoid these supplements if I'm taking an anti-anxiety drug or an antidepressant drug? Do they play well together?
Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So the ones that may elevate serotonin, for example, we have to be careful because if you're taking a drug that can elevate serotonin, there's this condition called serotonin syndrome. It's very rare. I personally have not seen it in 30 years, but I read about it all the time. So we would probably try to find a herb in that case that's not going to affect serotonin. And we might go with a single source herb instead.
But once again, the key point is talk with you, have that consultation and really kind of understand what product is going to be the best fit. Don't just grab something off the shelf, right?
Right, exactly.
Excellent. Well, Greg, I say this after every one of our segments. I learned so much talking with you. I always appreciate your knowledge and the study you put into understanding the role that botanicals and nutritional supplements can make in helping us get through a rough time. So thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Can I interject one last thing?
Oh, absolutely.
If you would like to get more information on sleep and breathing exercises, sign up for our newsletter. Just go out to our website, sign up for our newsletter. I send out only one newsletter a month. And I try to put practical information in it, and I'll include my breathing and anti-stress exercises in there, and they can be very helpful.
Man, it's proven by science. Absolutely, they can. I agree with you on that. And you can sign up for that newsletter at Fort Wayne Custom RX website, which is fwcustomrx.com. Greg, thanks again.
Thank you.